Watts. I'm a geologist licensed in the state of Tennessee. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. So I know you've all been studying Karst. You've got the banner right there on the wall. That's impressive. Most schools don't talk about geology, so I'm glad to hear that. So I know you've been studying how does Karst affect population in our area and maybe even around the world. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. Got a couple of other things thrown in there. But the topic, like I said, Karst, how it, what is it, how it forms, and how it affects population. Okay, so let's define Karst. What is Karst? It's a German word. So my definition is very simple. It's land lowering due to dissolution, right? Water dissolves carbonate rock, limestone, and it makes the land dissolve and lower as it dissolves. Merriam-Webster defines it as an irregular limestone region with sinkholes, underground streams, and caverns. The Oxford Dictionary defines it as a landscape underlain by limestone which has been eroded by dissolution, producing ridges, towers, fissures, sinkholes, and other characteristic landforms. So, y'all are all going to Mammoth Cave tomorrow, right? So, you know, this would be like Mammoth Cave right here. Right here. That's Mammoth Cave, basically. Part of Mammoth Cave is dry, which doesn't have any water coming into it, so it's just dry. The other part is wet, so that would be kind of like here where there's a waterfall, and down in here where there's a stream, right? So the way it works is you've got the ground surface, right? And water's flowing through it. Well, water is going to percolate down through the ground and find cracks in the ground, right? Crack, all these little cracks, and they're going to go down like that. They're going to get into the limestone and they're going to dissolve it, or weather it, chemical weathering, which takes the molecules of the limestone away, molecule by molecule as it flows, like here, and so in the subsurface, under our ground right now, under the ground, under our feet, right here, you've got limestone. And when it rains, water goes down, flows down, and then it meets up with more water here, and it meets up with more water here, and then just collects and flows. So that's kind of the general understanding of how Karst, what Karst is. Okay, so where is Karst in the United States? It's almost everywhere in each state, but it's primarily here in the southeast and in the Midwest. You can see all the blue. All the blue is Karst regions. The red is sinkholes. That's where there's lots of sinkholes, and you can see right here where we are, and in Mammoth Cave, just north of here, there's lots of sinkholes. I'm sure you probably know this, but Mammoth Cave is the world's longest known cave system in the entire world. It's like 50 minutes north of here, so that's really incredible that it's so close. It's basically in our backyard. In Tennessee, we have the most known caves in the United States. So there's more caves in Tennessee than in any other state. Known. You know, there's presumably lots of caves that haven't been discovered because they don't connect or there's no surface expression of the cave. But the known ones, there's more in Tennessee than any other state. Here's another couple of diagrams to help you wrap your mind around how it forms. You know, this is time, so as time progresses, we get further erosion, right? Here in the limestone, earlier in time, there's the limestone is fairly competent, which means it's intact and it hasn't been broken down or dissolved, right? It's all still there, but it's starting to break down, right? It's in the beginning stages. You've got a couple of sinkholes here that are starting to form. You've got a little valley where the stream is cutting through the limestone. And now, kind of in the middle progression of this timeline, the valley is cut deeper into the limestone. You've got more fissures being widened by the water, and it just expands through time. So now here, toward the end of this diagram's time frame, you've got a much deeper valley, many more open caves or fissures in the subsurface, because that's how it works. Over time, karst develops. And then this is just another little diagram of how water percolates and infiltrates from the surface down into the subsurface into a void that's been opened up, and you get development of speleothems and air, and it, you know, this is basically a cave. Okay, so this is kind of another good scientific explanation of how karst forms. So carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, together with root respiration and the decomposition of soil, is dissolved into the groundwater. And when that percolates and finds its way into little fractures and voids in the ground, it speciates, or it kind of separates and turns into two new compounds. So you get carbonic acid and bicarbonate. And the carbonic acid is what's responsible for the dissolving of the limestone. So when it rains, it mixes with carbon dioxide in the air. That flows into the subsurface and it dissolves the limestone. You know, limestone, you might think, limestone's hard, you know, I can't hardly break it with a hammer. And it is hard. But its chemical composition is such that it can be broken down by chemical weathering fairly easily and dissolve away and form karst. Okay, so here's some pictures. So this would be like a fissure in the ground. You know, fissures, they get bigger through time, right? So this could have started just as a little tiny crack, and then over thousands, if not millions of years, widened and got wider and wider and wider until it gets so wide that it's the sink for an area. It's the sink, like a sinkhole. And that's what these two pictures are. They're sinkholes. So imagine right here where this sinkhole is, there was a small fracture and a fissure. And then over time, water continued to flow until it became the sink area for the area in which the water would drain to. And that's what these two pictures are. This sinkhole is actually on my property. On the north part of my property, we have a sinkhole that it takes a lot of water. But it'll all be gone within a few hours because you know, the sinkhole drains away. And sinkholes can be huge and dangerous. Don't ever play around a sinkhole, okay? It's really important. Don't ever play around a sinkhole. If you see a sinkhole, just stay away. It's not worth falling into it, or it could open up and collapse under your feet and you'll be gone. Alright, so let's talk about some cave features. Okay, so we call them speleothems. Have y'all heard the word speleothems? No? Okay, so that's good. Alright, so speleothems are any type of feature within a cave. And I brought some examples I'm going to show you of actual speleothems. So, okay, so let's go back to when we were talking about how the water's flowing, and it finds a crack, and it finds a crack, and it comes down, and then it opens up into the cave, and then it drips. Okay, it drips, drip, 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 drip. And over thousands, if not millions of years, there's a buildup of the minerals. So in the water that is flowing through the ground, it carries minerals. Okay, mostly calcite, the mineral calcite, which is a major component of limestone. So when limestone gets broken down, like I said, it carries away its constituents, which is a calcium molecule and a carbonate molecule. When they get broken down, the calcium or calcite is separate, and it can precipitate when it hits the open air, basically. You can think of it that way. So when it flows through, the chemical constituents are flowing through these cracks. When it hits this open air in the cave and it wants to precipitate, it wants to form back into a solid. And that's how you get cave formations. So there's lots of different formations. Like, I'm sure you've all heard of a stalactite and a stalagmite, right? Right? Yes or no? Yes, good. Okay. So the way I always remember a stalactite here is a stalactite's always on the ceiling because it's got a hole tight. You can always remember it that way to distinguish between the two. So it's got a hole tight stalactite. And then a stalagmite is the one on the bottom where it drips. So stalactite and stalagmite. And over time, if given the right conditions, the water flows continuously, is continually carrying the minerals that want to precipitate out, they'll form a column. And you'll have a column. There's lots of different types. You've got, flow stones. Let's see, what are some of these? Like draperies. There's lots. I don't know all the names, but basically they're all flow stones, and they're all calcites. They're distinguished by where and how they form within the cave system. You ever heard of travertine? There's lots of tile, like fancy tile that you would put in your bathroom or on a nice floor. It's called travertine, and that forms in caves. It's a cool, cold water precipitant. That would be like, travertine would be like, what's this? A shelf stone, yeah. I mean, that would basically be how travertine forms. Here, I'm going to walk around and show you some of these. So, this is, here, I'll turn the lights on for this. Watch your eyes, here we go. So, you see how you can see how the water flows down like that. You see the layers, got the layers built up. The layers got to flow down. So this is a part of a speleothem. I'm not sure which one because I just found it on the side of the road. I found both of these on the side of the road where they had done a road cut for expansion of a roadway, and when they blasted into the rock, it opened up some voids that had these minerals in them. So I say that if you were ever to go into a cave, please do not take any type of speleothem from the cave. It's very important when you go to Mammoth Cave. We'll hear all this again. Don't touch the speleothems. The oils on your hands and the bacteria on your hands can inhibit the growth of these and potentially stop them from growing altogether. So that's why I say I found these when they were already damaged, if you will. So I'll walk around. You can see the growth. Yeah, be gentle, because this one is kind of road. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Oh. Is that you? Huh? What's it called?
You see the layers? See how they're all like sheets? That's the precipitant of the minerals as they flow. Yeah. So I've got some more pictures here to show you. So, you know, these are speleothems. And you have to have, what do you have to have a speleothem? Water. Excellent. So, in a dry cave, you will not have speleothems. It's only in a wet cave. So there's a column. You can see where the stalactite and the stalagmite grew and met. Probably right there. See all these different types. And tomorrow when you go to Mammoth Cave, you'll see a lot of this. And they'll explain the different, like I was, you know, all these different types. And they'll show you all the different types. So you'll get to actually see this up close and personal tomorrow. So here's some personal pictures of Mammoth Cave when I went several years ago. This first picture is the entrance to the historical cave. There's lots of different cave tours. Are y'all taking the historical? Yeah. So this is how you'll enter the cave. Right down this long stairway into the cave. And the beginning part is in the dry section. This is part of the dry section. You won't see any speleothems up here. It's when you travel further back in, you'll see different formations and, you know, see how this is U-shaped? What caused that? Water, exactly. All that rock dissolved away. So rock forms horizontally and continuously to its bounds of the environment in which it was deposited in. So all that rock in between here and there got weathered away and it's gone. Okay, so now let's get into, now that we know and we've defined what karst is, let's talk a little bit about what y'all are discussing and how it affects population. Like I said, karst develops from chemical weathering. And I'm sure this terrain right here looks familiar to everyone. This picture is from southern Kentucky. You know, this looks like here too. We're on the Highland Rim. It's known for sinkholes and karst topography, and you know this is what our area looks like. It's a lot of rolling hills and ridges and sinkhole formation. Which, you know, we live in a more rural area up here, so a lot of the land is delegated for pasture land. I'm sure, you know, we've got pasture land right outside here and all over the place. So that's kind of, in our area, I'd say the majority of what the land use is for is for agricultural reasons. Okay. Don't want to get anybody scared or in a panic or whatever, but I think it's worth knowing that in 2005, right here in Portland, on Hood Trail, which is maybe a mile or two from here, a sinkhole opened up under Troy and Yvonne Gibbons' house, and it partially collapsed the house. okay? They were fine, they didn't get injured, but their house was a complete loss. So this can happen here, and it happens all over the place where there are sinkholes and karst topography. It's just a fact of life. It can't be helped. And you never know when it can happen. It could just happen all of a sudden. So, keep that in mind. That's why I say it's very important. Do not play around sinkholes because you never know. They can open up in an instant, and like I said, you're gone. So here's a couple of other pictures. This picture is in Florida. Florida is also known for a lot of karst topography and sinkholes. These two houses were totally a loss. Again, no one was injured, but massive property damage and loss, right? This picture is in Japan. So, what do we see here? All these pipes, utilities, wires, gas lines. Karst topography can affect population by an interruption of utility services. If a sinkhole were to open up and damage, a utility, that's a way it can affect populations. It can affect populations by property damage or loss of life even. I mean, people have died from a sinkhole. Like I said, it's just a fact of life, and that's why you need to be cautious and just stay away. All right, so another aspect of how it can affect population is the drinking water, right? Like I said, all these cracks and fissures are what causes karst to develop. So there's subsurface pathways. We have agricultural land use. All of the cows, they're going to produce feces and urine, and it's going to run off into the streams and then percolate into the groundwater. It could promote fecal bacteria that could get into groundwater and then go to someone's water well, and then they would be drinking that, right? That's one way it could also impact. Or, to what I do in my career, is it could be a potential pathway from a contaminated site, like an industrial site that has pollution. That can enter the groundwater, and often does enter the groundwater and contaminate aquifers. So that's another way it impacts water wells. So I'll talk just a little bit about what I do in my career as a geologist. So we investigate contaminated sites where industrial companies or areas, legacy sites have contaminated the area. The contamination has got into the groundwater and it needs to be fixed or remediated. So we go in and we drill borings with a drill rig to a certain depth, sometimes into rock. That's a big, huge rock core right there. We build a well that's down into the surface where groundwater will flow into it, and then we can put a pump and remove that water, send it to a lab, and test for what contaminants are in the aquifer. Here's some other samples of contaminated soil. This is from a project where there's lots of basically oil in the ground. So that's oily soil. This sample right here was actually at a landfill where they, back in the 70s, decided to use as daily cover. So I don't know if you know how landfill works, but you got trash and then you've got soil, trash, soil until it's full. And they used soil that had been mixed in with radioactive material. So this landfill has got a big problem with radioactive material being in the landfill, and it's just spread all over the place. It's a Superfund site. It's kind of a disaster. That's in Missouri, so don't worry about it. It's not anywhere close to here, but we had to drill through the landfill, and this is, the landfill waste. And something I'll say to this, being an environmental guy, you know, when you throw something away, you think, oh, it's gone, it's in the trash, trash man picks it up, takes it away, and it ends up in the landfill. Well, this trash was put in place in the early 70s. When we brought it out of the ground, all the trash was pristine. You'd think it all would break down, but it doesn't. It's in an environment without oxygen, so there's no bacteria to break it down. There was newspaper in these samples, and you could read it like perfectly. It was just wet. That was the only thing. It was pristine. It was like it was just printed. And it's, you know, 50 years old. So think about your use of materials and where it ends up, right? Because we only have a certain amount of land. This project, someone had, instead of disposing used oil to the proper place, they decided to dump it in a creek. And so we had to go in and vacuum out with a big truck vacuum all this oil. It was like 3,000 gallons of oil. And we had to dig up some of the rock that had been contaminated. So just think about that. I know I'm running out of time. These are just some other samples, or examples of what I do. This is the setup for sampling groundwater, rock samples, other things like that. And then I want to leave you with that it's never too early to start thinking about your career, okay? I was 30 years old when I graduated college. So you don't have to know exactly what you want to do right this second. But just start thinking about it, okay? Because it's important. And if you do what you love, if you find something you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. So keep that in mind. It's never too late. You can change your mind. Just start thinking about what you want to do because it's important. So I'll open up to questions. Who's got questions?
On the topic of sinkholes and stuff.
All right, be quiet, right? Let's listen to him.
Sinkholes, Portland intended to build 283 houses in a sinkhole this year.
Okay.
Because I know someone who's from the city council, and I talked to him about it.
Oh, yeah?
He thought there was just an area.
To build in that area? Yeah, probably so.
Because there was like 3 sinkholes and already opened up.
Yeah. You can stabilize a sinkhole to a degree. But yeah, that's a tough one, you know. Buyer beware, right? Buyer beware, especially in this area, you know. Because like I said, there could be a sinkhole in these. Probably not, no. I wouldn't think so. There are certain places like Carlsbad Capital, that's in Arizona, so that's a huge cave. So, you know, there are areas in dry places with caves. There's no doubt about that. But usually caves are going to be where there's more water. There's more likelihood that there will be a cave where you have limestone and lots of water. Go ahead.
Are you dogs daddy?
Pardon?
Are you dogs daddy?
I am. Any more questions? Quicksand is like liquefied earth. A sinkhole is an open hole where water goes into it. So sinkhole is open. Quicksand would be just like super saturated soil. There's not much hole. There's lots of biology in Mammoth Cave. I'm not specific. I don't know the specifics, but I know there's like blind crayfish, blind salamanders that they don't use light to see, so they're all
Yeah.
to
I couldn't find them. I can find them.
live in those conditions. I'm sure you'll learn more about it tomorrow, but I'm not for certain. Go ahead. No, I didn't. No, I wasn't associated. Go ahead.
My aunt threw a chair in the sinkhole and it stopped growing. Why did it stop growing?
She threw what into a sinkhole?
A chair.
A chair?
Not growing.
Well, like I said, you can do things to slow a sinkhole from growing. You can make it to be not so prone to erosion, because every time water goes into the sinkhole, it gets a little bit wider. But yeah, it just slowed it, but I'm sure it didn't stop it. So it could potentially continue to grow, so be wary of that. Go ahead.
You said there was wet parts of the key, right? So
Hang on, I can hear you.
You said there was wet parts of the key, right?
Yes.
But our feet like get like really wet.
No, they've got elevated walkways that you'll stay out of that. I think there is a part, I mean, depending on how much water's coming in the cave, you might get a little splash, something like that, or feel the moisture, but you're not going to be walking in water. Who else? Any other questions? Go ahead. What's limestone made out of? Limestone is calcium and carbonate, which is like CaCO3. So when you it forms in oceans. So all limestone is formed in an ocean, and it develops under certain conditions, usually in shallow seas. Sometimes it's got fossils in it because it was in an ocean. So, any more questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. You've been a great audience. I really appreciate coming here, and thank you for listening. I hope it's been interesting, and enjoy your time tomorrow. I'm sure it'll be a blast. And just remember about stay away from sinkholes. Thank you.